Hi there. Oh, it's been a while. A lot of people breathing. Okay, we have a lot of material today. This was before, it was like a 45, 50-minute talk, and then the last 2.5 years, I've had time to think about what I want to say here today. And that's a lot of time, it turns out, so I'll try and keep it as short as possible. Let's go. Okay. I'm a designer, and so I'm very interested in what people do, why they do it, what do they need, what do they want, why? And I also want to know, well, can we make something that helps with that, right? Do we have a tool? Can we make something that, sometimes it doesn't mean making something at all, sometimes it's taking something away. How do we help people do what they need to do? That's kind of who I am as a designer. I'm not a graphic designer. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about exactly how things should look, but I kind of go towards the needs and wants and interaction design. So that's me. And I always want to know, okay, we made this thing, we put it out there. How are people using it? Are they using it the way we thought they would use it? Almost never. People always find ways. There's a great quote from a general, I think in World War I, and he said, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. No design survives contact with the user. Throw your ideas away, do better. And so I also wonder when I'm making things, how do I use things that other people have made for me? Because I see people using my stuff all the time, but how do I use other people's things? What do they think of me? What do they want from me? And I saw this picture, this meme, right? Dress for the dystopia you want, not the dystopia that you're in, and made me laugh. And it made me also admire it, because this is someone who is suiting up for whatever. And I'm like, well, yeah, how do we respond to all of this, to everything? When I grew up, I watched dystopian television shows and films. So this is The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham. I don't know if people have watched this or read the book. It was on when I was a kid. It was on television, and it was scary. And I watched Blade Runner, which was scary in a different way. It painted this very interesting, three-dimensional dystopian world, really. It was fascinating. I watched the Terminator movies, obviously. I watched Strange Days. I don't know if people remember Strange Days. This was just before Y2K. And so everybody was kind of like, what's going to happen? And probably at least half of you remember Y2K, right? Apparently it's cool again. Apparently like the Tumblr kids found Y2K and they love it. It's kind of become a thing. But anyway, super scary. No one knew, would the world end? Would technology just crash? What was going to happen? Instead, Ray Fiennes made a movie. It was fine. This is not the dystopia I was promised, right? This is not what I thought I was going to get. Maybe that's good. The dystopia that we actually have is kind of a little bit different. And I also think that we have fetishized sort of futurism and dystopia, like it's got this kind of romantic idea, right? That like, oh, imagine like everything's black, everything's dark. It's kind of cool. We read books, we read fiction books about this. It excites us as a topic. And I want to mention this thing called techwear. I don't know if people are aware of techwear. It's kind of this. It's this idea that like you can dress up for this dystopian future. I have come today dressed for this dystopian future. And mostly what I think when I see this picture is, wow, this dystopian future is really disturbing. Belts do not exist anymore. Everyone has to hold up their pants. It's also become slightly more democratized. When I look for dystopian kind of techwear stuff, a couple of years ago, it was pretty much all very kind of testosterone heavy, and now it's become more diverse, which is really cool. And I found this quote on a website: techwear is the synthetic armor with which we engage the collapsing Anthropocene. It also looks good most of the time. And I just want to unpack that for a minute. The collapsing Anthropocene. It's pretty heavy, right? So obviously, right, there's been this thing that has taken our attention for the last 2 years. And it's really hard to stand on this stage and talk about dystopia and not mention it. And yet, I could talk about this for 2 hours. So COVID-19, it's been 2 years. It's a huge thing. If you're here in this room, you are very, very lucky. Maybe we're not finished with it yet. We don't know. And I don't want to trivialize that at all. I think it's interesting. It's not dystopian, but I think its consequences have potential to be dystopian. Real dystopia is already here. You may have noticed a climate crisis. Things are on fire, a lot, literally, not just metaphorically. And if you look at the image text on these, you can see that this is all around the world. It's not just California that is having wildfires sparked by negligent power companies not taking care of their equipment. But it's everywhere. It's a problem, obviously. But we're just kind of living with this in the background all the time. And so what we should be thinking is, how can I avert this existential crisis, right? What can I do? There's COVID, there's the climate crisis. What you should totally do is buy this 100-year hoodie, right? Because it can cope with fire, it can cope with rain, and temperatures 4 times hotter than the sun. This is amazing. It's €445. And that is like just €4.50 per year, which I think you'll agree is like a bargain, right? Also, it's super handy because fire, rain, and temperatures 4 times the temperature of the sun is next week's weather. We're mining Bitcoin, and I have a problem with this on several levels, but the main objection right now for me to Bitcoin is the carbon footprint. It's huge. 1 Bitcoin is 1 house in the US worth of electricity for 76 days. And almost all of that energy is coming from fossil fuel. So mining a Bitcoin seems like a great way to get rich, but there is a huge cost to this, and I don't think we've considered it yet. Also, you can't be a billionaire or a trillionaire Bitcoin person like if you're on fire, right? Like, it's really weird that people who are mining Bitcoin are actually bringing the end of the world forward, but like they want to be rich, but there will be no rich. There will just be fire and death and horrible things. I Googled dystopia, as you do. 111 million hits. Not one more, not one less, 111 million. And I was like, is this an Easter egg? So I put that into binary, like what is that? It's 448, no significance to me at all, but okay. But like 111 million, does that mean that dystopia has become meaningless? Like we're just dystopia this, dystopia that. Do we care? Is it just a thing, a label that we slap on things now? Ryan Broderick says something great about this, really helpful. Usually it's because insanely wealthy people are using technology to rob you of your personal agency. And I think that's a great definition of what dystopia is. Let's watch a movie. We don't have sound. Okay, well, this guy is saying, I can't get this soap thing to operate, won't do it. And his friend is like, you're too black. Too black. All right, I'm going to get a paper towel. And that's white. I'm going to put that under. There we go. Hey, soap. Right? Sorry that there's no sound. And we have this problem, like, technology is robbing us of agency. Dan Hahn writes about how he was just minding his own business on LinkedIn, and it was like, hey, is this your business? And he had 2 choices, yes or no. And he was like, well, what if I don't want to answer that question? It took him a long time to notice the little close button at the top there. But he said, like, we're constantly being asked to give up information where you don't have a choice not to answer. So he wants your Miranda rights for technology. You have the right to remain silent. Facebook is holding shadow profiles of non-users. And as a non-Facebook user, this is really worrying for me and annoying for me, that they have used information about me from other people to put together a profile on me, probably my contact details, because people upload their contacts to Facebook for convenience. And as a non-user, I can't ask for my data to be deleted. As a non-user, I can't see what data they have. So I feel pretty disempowered by that. Zainab Tufekci talks about how algorithms can identify, for example, pregnant women because their devices give up information about their sleep patterns, their Google searches reveal what they're looking for, and sometimes maybe even identify that the woman is pregnant based on what her digital behavior before she knows it. And people trade this information. This is not okay. This is from 10 years ago. I think it still has resonance. And another thing from 10 years ago, because we're talking at this conference about things like 10-year anniversary, things that have happened between now and, or between then and now. And Stowe Boyd was talking back then about how it's going to take us a long time to understand how to manage the amount of information that is happening to us. And he said, well, 10 years, maybe, until we understand how to process this, how to handle it, because there is a lot of information. And how did that work out? Anyone? I missed the early internet. People were like, you gotta see this dude, this cat sure is long. And they were right, it was really long. Never should have gotten any more complicated than that. I agree with that. I love this. One of the things that I have enjoyed the last few years is, although there's a lot of things to not enjoy, the humor that people are finding in situations is amazing. It's sharp, it's dark, I like it. It's a coping mechanism, we need it. So what happened in the last 10 years was that tech accelerated a lot, you may have noticed. Everybody got a megaphone. Good, democratically speaking. Bad, very noisy, very noisy. And the way that I see what happened is that mainstream media panicked, and they saw that social media was just exploding. And they were like, oh, we don't want to get left behind. What can we do? What does social media do? Oh, everything is now, everything is responding to something that just happened. So they got into that more. There were more hot takes on things. And they also bought into the idea that, like, can you believe this crap is currency? This is what we do now, like pointing at things and going, ah, right? And the news does this as well now, and I think that that is dangerous. I'll talk more about that later. And attention got weaponized, right? Everyone's attention, which before we were kind of cavalier with attention on the internet, like everyone was trying to get it. And there were lots of marketers got really interested in neuroscience, for example. And they were like, how can we get your attention? What can we do? Which tricks can we employ? But I think attention the last 10 years has become an actual weapon. I think it is directed, but not by us. It is directed by the owners and designers of technology. And we are not necessarily in control, or at least we have not taken control. So my background is as an academic psychologist before I got into technology and design. And so when I look at stuff like this, I think about psychology. And I think about this. Not really, but this is a bunch of psychologists from over 100 years ago. And this is how psychology started. It's kind of new as science goes. And a lot of it was really cool. If you excuse the kind of, this is a bunch of old white dudes with beards, it was really cool because a lot of them sat around and they thought really hard about things like the nature of perception. It was really interesting. Anyway, I don't remember these guys. They were like 2 years ahead of me in university, so. And everyone always thinks you're going to talk about Freud, right? Everyone thinks you're going to talk about Freud. And Freud had a very sticky set of principles. He was very kind of like, everything that he said is super interesting to us still. Unfortunately, he wrote untestable code. It's not possible, really, to falsify his stuff, so we're going to forget Freud today. Because what I'm interested in is things that you're probably used to. Let's make a hypothesis about something. Let's test it. Let's see what happens. Let's refine our thoughts. Let's go again. And this is what original experimental psychology was. Exactly this. So I want to present to you top 5 old white guys from psychology, because I think there is still something here. I think we skip this, we forget this, because we got a little excited about kind of contemporary psychology and what it has to teach us. But I think this stuff is important, and if you are under 90 years old, you may not remember all this. So for everyone who is under 90 years old here, just going to kind of recap some of these topics for you. If you're older than 90, you can absolutely take a little sleep right now. This is fine. Right, number 5, William James. I'm sorry, for whatever reason, I decided that it would be funny, maybe it's only funny to me, to like dress them up as though they were doing the Paris to Dakar rally in like the 1960s. I don't know why, it was just a thing, and I was like, well, now I have to do this. So William James, number 5. And he asked, right, this is 1890. William James is asking himself, how many things can we attend to at once? And he wrote a great book all about psychology and 1 chapter on attention. And it's great. It's very readable today. It's good. And he said there's no such thing as voluntary attention sustained for more than a few seconds at a time. Familiar? Old news, but good news. I mean, not good, but interesting. And I think about that a lot. This is a great website. Everything that is wrong with the internet right now, it may be familiar. All right, I'm going to stop that there. Amy Hoy says, software in a futile bid to become helpful has become a thing we have to slap multiple times a day and cry, stop that. And she's right, we do. Unfortunately, the thing for William James is, he says, millions of items of the outward order outside his own head are presented to the senses which never properly enter into my experience. Why? Because they have no interest for me. My experience is what I agree to attend to. That's nice. That's nice that he could be so bored that he would be like, I will direct my own attention. Cute. So William James summed up, crazy intuitive, made some amazing leaps in perceptual psychology, but kind of a blind spot for where attention was going to go in the century after. Number 4, Martin Seligman. Seligman came up with this idea of learned helplessness. So he did these kind of horrible things, right, with dogs. What he would do is he would shock dogs. He would put them in a little cage, and the floor would be electrified, and he would deliver electric shocks. And later on, dogs who had learned that they couldn't escape, when given the opportunity to escape from the electric shocks, would not try, and he called this learned helplessness. This is horrible, by the way, just like I don't endorse this in any way. This is just what people used to do. In particular, there was a time in psychology that I like to think of as BE, before ethics, when people just did this kind of stuff all the time. I'm not saying it's perfect now, but it is slightly better. And then people sort of re-examined Seligman later on and said, well, okay, rather than starting out with agency and then learning to be helpless, maybe we all start out kind of not knowing if we can, but then we get role models, we get experience, and that teaches us to help ourselves. It teaches us to have agency. But this doesn't happen to everyone because of circumstances or other things. And this theory of learned helplessness has been super influential in psychology. So, for example, in the study of depression, in the study of anxiety, in the study of all kind of disorders of mood and anxiousness and so on. Really interesting, and trauma. And what is the relevance of this today, you may ask? Well, good question, right? I don't know if it's easy for people to see the correspondence. About 10 years ago, my friend Frankie showed a Twitter client to her mum. I think it was maybe TweetDeck or something. And it was one of the apps where new tweets just kept dropping in and kept dropping in. And her mum looked at it and she was horrified. And she said, well, how do you make it stop? You can't. It just keeps coming. That's what we do now. I think this is exhausting for people. Watching spinach die is like, that is the definition of helplessness. And again, down home, like, why am I spending time trying to figure out how to log out of stuff or like change settings on my phone that like I didn't agree to change? I'm not driving this, you know? Zeynep Tükfekci, again, says like she has been programming forever. She is a technologist, a journalist about technology, and she's given up. And her friends who have this background have given up too. And if these are like people who work in technology, Dan Hon does, she does, how are we, maybe not we, but like people generally, I imagine the average level of technology competency in this room is pretty higher than average, I hope. But these are capable people, and they're like, I can't, you know? And I think also that technology takes advantage of this. So technology has kind of created this situation in which we have lost agency and we don't feel powerful. But then it's like, let me help you with that. Let me give you something that's a convenient solution for that to help you stop feeling so helpless and you don't have time. And I think of this as creepiness disguised as convenience because it looks like it's doing you a favor, but actually it's even more insidious, it's even worse, but it just doesn't feel like that. And I wanted to talk about Little Red Riding Hood, and then I realized that actually there was this great opportunity to give a shout out to Norway's entry in the Eurovision Song Contest this year, which is exactly about Little Red Riding Hood and wolves and getting grandma eaten, and you should give the wolf a banana so it doesn't eat your grandma. It's a classic. I was so disappointed that it didn't do better. Okay. We have, as convenience, we have apps like WhatsApp that will help you by asking you to upload your contacts. Sometimes it's obligatory. Some things, at least before, I don't know how it is now, would only let you proceed if you uploaded your contacts, which to me is really scary. And some companies are really non-specific about what they're going to use this for. And I want to make a really important point here, is that what is convenient for you does not count as consent for someone else. I discovered one day that my dentist, my old dentist from the UK, not in Norway, where I now live, my old dentist is connected to me on LinkedIn. How? Really? Oh, she uploaded her contacts. She did that without my permission. She gave my personal details to a third party without my consent. And probably a lot of you in the room have done this for whatever reasons, for convenience, because you were tired or whatever. But I'm not okay with that. This is not consent. I did not consent for a third party to get my data. I also think technology companies, I think in a way we've created a thing that I call placebo agency, which is not real agency, but it allows you to feel that you have agency, and that can be anything from posting on social media to, for example, saying, oh, I accept all cookies, or I do not accept. But you get buttons to press. It feels good, right? I have acted. I have agency. I chose something. And so I wonder, how are we coping with this helplessness and this feeling of just being like, oh, I can't even. Well, we're living in the golden age of pajamas, everybody. That's how we're coping. Good news. I do, again, back to this humor that we have developed about the situation that we are in. I love it. Sometimes it's heartbreaking. This emerged, okay, boomer emerged now. I'm probably offending people. There are probably boomers in this room. I'm sure there are boomers in this room. Deal with it. Your time has, it's not over, but give way. Give way. Be graceful. Eric Johnson yesterday, no, day before, Monday, sorry, said that he felt that social media is like 99.9% mouth, which I thought was a great description of it. It is. We should listen more. But at the moment, I feel like a lot of that mouth is being used just to express kind of like terror and horror and helplessness, actually, that we need somewhere to put those feelings. And we put a lot of it into satire. I don't know if anyone has watched at any point The Daily Show. Jon Stewart was the host on it for a long time, several years. And it was to the point, it was really kind of like black humor. It was good, it was funny, it was well written, it was very current. And then he gave up the seat to someone else, and I read an interview with him recently where he expressed kind of regret that so much time and attention from everybody had gone into satire, because all of that time and attention was not focused on actually making things better. And I think he's great, I love the show, but he also has a point, right? All of that energy and time we spend enjoying satire is energy and time we don't spend changing the thing that we're satirizing. Right, so Seligman, back to Seligman. Unkind to dogs, not good, totally right about the internet, wow. Still alive, so he's got that going for him. All right, B.F. Skinner and friends. This is actually, I'm cheating a little bit. This is Pavlov, this is Thorndike, this is behaviorist, psychologist, generally. But I'm going to talk about Skinner because I have to pick one. We're short on time. They looked at behavior and reward and punishment. So if you do a thing, if you reward a behavior, or if you punish a behavior, what happens to it? Generally speaking, if you reward a behavior, you see more of it. If you punish a behavior, you see less of it. And anyone who has children will probably be able to relate to this. And the experiment that Pavlov did, which you've maybe heard of, is that he put cruelty to dogs as a theme. I'm so sorry, I love dogs. This is just what people did. It's not cool. I'm not okay with it. He would put dogs in a harness, and then he would ring a bell and feed them at the same time. And when he'd done this often enough, he would be able to ring the bell, and the dog would start to salivate, anticipating the food. There was no food. So he could produce, just by ringing the bell, he could produce this behavior in the dog that suggested, whether the dog was aware of it or not, suggested that there was an association there now, that he didn't need the food to provoke that behavior. And then Skinner came along and started developing theories about intermittent variable reward. And this is where you only get rewarded for a behavior sometimes. Not all the time, just sometimes. And this makes people crazy. It makes rats crazy, right? Because if you can imagine fruit machines or something in Vegas, right? People are like, sometimes they pay out, but not always. But if I just keep putting quarters in, if I just keep pressing the button, then maybe. And rats do this. If you give them like sugar or something like that, sometimes press the lever. And this might look like a weird next slide, but it occurred to me, so when I grew up, we weren't super wealthy, and my mum would go to jumble sales or rummage sales to look for good clothes. And you get this pile, and you just kind of have to get in there, right? You're just kind of like, oh, this is good, nope, 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 nope. And very occasionally, you find a thing. And yes, great, and then you find another thing. So it's this intermittent variable reward, right? It's like, oh, finding stuff. And I think like she did it because we needed to do it. Sometimes she would find really good stuff and she could sell it as well. But sometimes I think she did it because she liked it. Because there was that kind of like, yes, I found something great. And we do this as well when we consume stuff on the internet, for example. Like, you know, you look at Metafilter, you look at Hacker News, you look at places that you go online for interesting material. And they're not all great, but some of them are really good. So you get this kind of intermittent reward schedule. And they're not all going to be good, not all tweets are going to be good, but we dig. We just want to find the next great thing so we can retweet it or so we can enjoy it or whatever. And so we've got this kind of fruit machine thing going on, right? That like, suddenly you find it, and you're like, ding, 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 yes, I scored. It keeps you coming back. And like, I'm okay with dressing up for this dystopia. I don't want to dress up as a rat. You're very welcome to dress up as a rat if you want, but I want to do better than rat. So, back to Skinner. Unkind to animals, reductionist. Thorndike was a eugenicist, which is pretty dystopian even for this talk. But they totally called it on the whole rats, levers, reward thing. Really on the nose. Right, number 2, Hermann Ebbinghaus. Ebbinghaus, this is like 1880s, a long time ago. He studied a thing called that came to be known as spaced retrieval. So the idea is that when you practice a thing, if you practice it at very short intervals, or if you do it all at once, you won't remember it for a long time. But if you practice at regular intervals and you space them out a little bit, you will learn better. And he could demonstrate that regular practice of the thing would help you get better at it. He says, for over a century, it's been recognized that learning, so over a century, he's writing this in 1885, and he said already for over a century, that learning and memory is enhanced when information is distributed over time when compared with the same amount of information massed together in time. If you have ever studied for an exam the day before, and then like you do the exam, and then you can't remember anything else, probably why. But you know what we're really good at, turns out? What do we do all the time? What do we practice all the time? Yeah, we take out our phones, we unlock the phones, we scroll. We are so good at this because we practice it all the time. And I'm just like, do you know, should we be practicing these things? Are these the right things to practice? Because we keep doing this. We're going to be amazing at Candy Crush. We're going to be amazing at scrolling. Is that it? Is that what we want? This is my favorite, by the way, like pop-up intrusion. This just happened to me one day, and I was like, okay, that's it. I've peaked. I can't find a better example than this. Another thing we practice is dismissing pop-ups. And we practice it so much that there's actually a research paper showing that like people dismiss pop-ups and like have become more practiced at dismissing it. And they say participants seem to be habituated to dialogues, presumably due to ubiquitous EULAs, so end-user license agreement, and blindly accept terms the more the presentation resembles a EULA. We did it to ourselves, and we did it by regular practice. And of course, then there's GDPR when we're talking about pop-ups. I have such mixed feelings about GDPR. Right, it's there to protect us. That's great. That is truly awesome. The implementation is a dumpster fire. And that's partly because the language in which it is written doesn't really specify tightly enough. Now, it's hard to write laws. I work in public service delivery. Laws are difficult. Writing them is not easy. But, you know, I went to training for GDPR shortly before it dropped, and I asked all these questions, and they were like, well, we don't really know yet. Someone has to sue first, so we understand it. So, and of course, what it delivers us is stuff like this, which is presumably GDPR compliant. But who is going to read this list starting from A and down to B on this screen? Who is going to do that? I have done it, but... and then you get to the bottom, and it's like, deny all. After you've been through them. This is not consent. This was, I promise these are true, it's not there anymore, Variety magazine online. These were their 2 options, deny all or accept and move on. And I was like, these are the buttons for our time. I looked the other day, they're not there anymore. And also the danger of having all of these dialogues is we can all go now, oh, well, you know, it's fine because GDPR. Okay, but what did you just consent to? What did you just click? That GDPR exists does not mean that you are protected by GDPR when you OK cookies, when you dismiss that pop-up. Another thing we do at spaced intervals is we practice outrage. Twitter is great for this. Twitter is maybe the outrage machine of our time. And there is no sound to this, I think. Can we have sound? Is that possible? Is that a yes? Yes to sound? Oh, sorry. Thank you. I'm sorry, I forgot to ask before. We can talk among ourselves meantime. What to say? I have to think of something to say. You all look lovely today. You do. It's nice. This is only slightly scary now. It was very scary at the beginning. It's getting less scary. Nobody has, I think, run out yet, screaming. Nobody has thrown anything at me. This is nice. Thank you. Is that good? Let's try it. All right. Ah, it's coming out of my laptop. Sorry, you want me to turn the volume?
Yeah, but I need to go into the settings.
Okay. Do you want to just leave it? All right. I want you to imagine that the goat and the person are talking. Otherwise, this is going to make no sense. But the goat is yelling. Oh, it works.
¿Qué opina usted del gobierno canario? ¿Y de los ayuntamientos de la isla?
This is perhaps my favorite commentary on Twitter ever. It's great and true, unfortunately. Another thing that we practice is not having agency. This really hit me. Maybe there's a positivity that I could change when I'm limply online, but I love to be limply online. We practice, I think, being limply online a lot. So we're going to get good at it if we continue. Inaction is also a habit then. If you practice not doing anything, you'll get really good at not doing anything. Ebbinghaus said. And humans are also really bad at apprehending time. So I feel like we are not aware of this practice going on. We're just usually in the moment. And we don't see that we have been practicing a thing for a long time, and we don't think about, well, what will happen if I practice this for a long time in the future? We're kind of stuck in now. And it being difficult to think about time makes it difficult for us to catch ourselves in this and perceive ourselves in this. So Ebbinghaus, basic premise, pretty solid, however, and like devastating consequences, right? So sometimes people ask me, if we had a question yesterday, do you think our attention spans are getting shorter? And I'm like, well, only to the extent that we practice having a short attention span. We practice changing things all the time, and so we're going to get really good at that. But we could practice other things. We could practice focus. We could practice concentration. We could practice doing one thing. All right, here we go. Gustav Fechner, number one. Gustav Fechner is attributed to have come up with the mere exposure effect. It was later kind of unpacked and developed, but Gustav Fechner is the one that people talk about when they start talking about mere exposure. And mere exposure is the idea that just by being exposed to something, you start to like it more. Just repeated exposure to a thing, and you prefer it to something else, randomly. And advertising is kind of relentless, both online and in real life. And I sort of I'd like to have images to illustrate this, and I realized that I cannot show you advertising, like there's already sponsor advertising here, but I don't want to show you a picture of advertising, because then you're just getting advertised at even more. Not going to do it, you have words instead. Another thing that I think is really interesting and concerning about exposure is a thing called the Atherton window. And this is this idea, right, that you start out, any given political idea usually, any given idea has a kind of a comfortable range for people, for the citizens, for politicians. But if you start expressing the more extreme ends of what is acceptable, the Atherton window shifts, and now that is the new okay. And I think a thing that we've seen a lot in the last few years is the Atherton window on some things has shifted a lot. And it shifted partly because the media were like, well, we're just going to give people a platform because we need something. And, you know, this kind of, can you believe this crap? This is the mechanism that gets used, right? Like you put someone on TV because they're good TV, because can you believe this crap? But that normalizes it. And we see the political discourse shift to someone who was fringe before, and my opinion, maybe should still be fringe. And when you share a thing, you're representing it. So people talk now about repping. You can rep a product. Like there was another hoodie that I have that I kind of wanted to wear today, but it's got like branding on it, and I don't want to rep that. I'm not here to be a representative for that company. I just, I want to talk to you. And so when you share a thing, you are repping that thing. And even if the thing that you're sharing is like, can you believe this crap? You're still repping it in a way. You're still magnifying its effect. You're still putting it out there. So Fechner, number one, nailed it on advertising. I mean, really, like, he is the king of advertising, right? Like, that is what advertising is today. It's just, it wears you down after a while. He also got in before Atherton on that whole kind of repeated exposure, allowing the Atherton window to shift. And I kind of feel like for certainly big social media and other things that we kind of love to hate, but we're still using, there's a bit of Stockholm syndrome. So the idea that like you spend so much time with these things that you're kind of like, it's awful, but I kind of sort of like it. And that's hard. Because network effects, right? Network effects mean that it's really hard for a new social media platform, for example, to get adopted because everyone's still over here. And you're trying to get people to go over there, and like maybe some early adopters go over there. I've done it with like Mastodon and various other things. And then like no one comes. Bonus old white guy with beard, not included in my top 5. This is Epictetus, and he lived about 2,000 years ago, so he's not in the forefront of psychology, but he was a philosopher. His writings are great. I recommend them. There's a really good translation that is very accessible. You don't have to be able to read or speak ancient Greek. He says, if somebody tried to take control of your body and make you a slave, you would fight for freedom. Yet how easily you hand over your mind to anyone who insults you. When you dwell on their words and let them dominate your thoughts, you make them your masters. 100% as relevant today as when he wrote it. So why do we do it? Also, really strong XKCD energy from this guy, by the way. I agree when Fabio said yesterday that people aren't evil, they just want to get their bonus. I agree with that. But these are business decisions. And Shoshana Zuboff talks about surveillance capitalism, and she talks about human experience as the raw material that is then being turned into kind of commercial practice. And Leah Elliott has produced this wonderful webcomic called Contra Chrome, where she details in a very accessible way everything that the Chrome browser is doing and tracking, including some stuff I had no idea about. I try not to use Chrome at all because it's pretty creepy, but even I was like, ay. Ryan Broderick again. There's no question now that Facebook doesn't care if their product kills you or is used to overthrow your government, but they will act swiftly and brutally if you ask them to pay for the content shared on their site. That is a business decision. These are also design decisions, and this is really like where I feel this is very personal for me, because all of this is design decisions. Like, everyone wanted their bonus, but really this much? You wanted your bonus that badly? And you think, well, maybe these organizations are just really inept. Maybe they didn't think it through. I've been in some inept organizations that were not good. This is not that. Like, no organization is this bad that they would produce this mess by mistake. What happened is that someone proposed it, someone said okay, someone designed it, and someone built it. These are real people, and they made decisions to do that. And you might think, well, you know, what if they work under an oppressive regime or whatever? We don't. We don't have to do that. I realized when I was writing this talk, Mike Monteiro has said all of this before me, which was disheartening when I was writing this talk. It's like, what will I talk about? He published this book in 2019, and on the cover of the book, you probably can't quite see, but it says, attention Amazon workers, you have the right to unionize and do all this stuff, but they still sell it on Amazon, because presumably Amazon is more interested in making money off this thing than it is it can just, put its foot down and quell this worker uprising for, basic rights and protections. But if we as designers participate in this, what does it say about us, right? Also, what is it doing to me when I participate in the design process? What's happening to me as a result of all this other stuff going on? I worry about that. And how can I help users if I feel helpless, right? My job is to act for users, very disempowered users, actually. So I work for the Norwegian state, and our users are often in trouble. They have financial difficulties, they've lost their jobs, they need income replacement to be able to carry on. And if I feel helpless, I can't help them. I need to feel empowered to do a good job for them. How can I be patient and kind in my work if I'm really angry because I've just been rage tweeting stuff? I can't. I need empathy, I need mindfulness. Where are these things if I'm making myself crazy with technology and the internet? And there's advertising everywhere. How is it affecting my work, right? So Kathy Sierra wrote a book a few years ago. She did all the head-first stuff ages ago, but more recently she wrote a book called Badass about how to make users feel badass and how to empower them. And I feel like designers also need a book like this at the moment, and maybe developers too, make us awesome. I want to feel empowered. I want to feel like Katniss Everdeen. I want to feel like this, right? Sure, I'll wear a tiara. What weapons does it have? I want that. So my clothing for this is that I use ad blockers. It's one small thing you can do. Adam Harvey published some really cool prototype concept stuff about fabric that will distract face recognition stuff, makeup that will distract face recognition stuff, so it kind of throws off the algorithms. Kate Rose made a great selection of clothes that would confuse license plate automatic recognition. And then we come to this whole thing. I've got 2 minutes left, my goodness. All right, this, again. What do we do? Like most of you, I went home 2 years ago, and I sat in a little room with my husband and the clothes dryer, and I took Teams calls and Zoom calls. And we tried to rebuild this site. I cannot get what we built because it's taken down. We took it down a few weeks ago, which was great, actually. But we built a new front page for our users to help them because the government passed a whole bunch of new regulations for the COVID virus, and we had to respond really quickly. We worked 7 days, a lot, for the first 2 or 3 months, I worked 6 or 7 days a week, and I know my colleagues did as well, just to try and get this stuff out there. And this could only work because people had laptops to take home. 2 years before, we would have been completely screwed, but it was new that everyone had a laptop. Not designers and devs, we had them before, but everybody in their organization, policy experts, everything. And we could do this because we had a design system. We didn't have to invent buttons from scratch. We could just take Lego bricks and use them so we could go fast. So it's really important to have that infrastructure in your organization. And if you dig all the way down, we had that because the organization wanted to invest in design, and a team manages the design system, a whole team. And we had that because we had been given a budget to do user-centered design, at least more than we do today. And we had that because we had a government who believed in funding digital services and making them better. And we had that because, et cetera, so you can kind of keep going down and down and down. And at the end, you end up in the Norwegian Parliament building, Stortinget, and this is where the buck kind of stops. We elect representatives to this, so you should vote, because these are the people making this happen. We have, for example, an organization in Norway called Datatilsynet, and what they do is they protect your privacy. And we have this because government agrees that it's important to have this. So vote, super important. And if you're in this room, you have agency. You can choose what you do and don't do. You can choose to vote. I hope you choose to vote for a representative democracy, but you exercise your vote. It matters. You have that chance. And remember to specify should not in your products. Remember that we have to think more actively and not reactively. This should not do whatever. And I think using white hat bad actors to try and simulate, well, what would happen if a bad actor got in? What would happen if someone tried to misuse this? Is a great way to do that. I worry what we're teaching AI. This is, my friend legit did this, okay? Like just put into DALL-E, like Liberace eating a whole goat and then this weird stuff. We're just gonna move right on. But what are we teaching AI? Like when AI finally like becomes properly, you know, a thing, what will it know? I'm disturbed. We need diverse people. Diverse output comes from having diverse teams working on stuff. So what I want to ask you is try to notice if you find yourself in learned helplessness. Rehearse things that you believe to be good. I think that's one simple action that you can do. I admire Keanu Reeves very much. He says, I'm at that stage of my life where I keep myself out of arguments. Even if you tell me 1 and 1 equals 5, you're absolutely correct. Enjoy. And I think refusing to engage is a great action. It's an inaction, but it's a powerful one. And I really agree with Greta Thunberg in many ways. She's my hero. She's amazing. She is all about direct action. And she says, don't waste your time by giving them any more attention. People you don't agree with, people you don't believe in, people who don't act for you when they should. So that's me. Act for the utopia you want. Dress how you like, but act for the utopia you want. Thank you.